Suicide is a stark indicator of human hardship. Yet the causes of these deaths remain understudied, particularly in developing countries. This analysis of India, where 1/5 of the world's suicides occur, demonstrates that climate change is fast becoming a major reason for farmers dying by suicide. Suicide records and climate data show that there is a direct correlation between high temperatures and increasing suicide rates. India's seeding season is experiencing high levels of heat, which is resulting in reduced crop yields. Suicides in agricultural communities have been a long-standing issue in the country. Many farmers have resorted to the ultimate. Since the 1970s, as farmers face increasing debt crisis. According to research conducted by the International Institute for Environment and Development, farmers account for at least 15% of the total number of suicides in India. More than 10,000 farmers and agricultural workers died by suicide in 2020. In urgent preventative action for climate-related suicides in rural India, researchers looked at rainfall patterns between 2014-15 and 2020-21 across 5 states with particularly high suicide rates. And as per the research, Chhattisgarh, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra and Telangana were the states with lower than normal rainfall and hence resulted in rising number of farmer suicides. India's farming sector has been deeply impacted by more frequent and widespread droughts in recent years. The increasing frequency of heat waves, a direct result of the climate crisis, is making matters worse. This year, India had its hottest February on record, and more heat waves are expected in the coming weeks, with concerns rising over the crops destroyed again by unseasonal heat and rains. The United Nations estimates that the climate crisis has reduced India's GDP between 2 to 5% in the past 20 years. The impact of climate change on Indian farmers is expected to worsen as the planet gets warmer. UN's top scientific body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has identified India as the country most at risk of reduced crop production due to climate crisis. But what is the solution for this? Researchers in their study suggest to implement social protection schemes such as public works programs. These schemes can then offer a safety net in the form of cash or food, build assets for long-term resilience, and prevent a humanitarian crisis. And for more on this, Ritu Bhardwaj, who is the principal researcher of this particular study at the International Institute for Environment and Development, joins us live from London. Thanks very much for speaking with WION, ma'am.
Thanks, Rohit.
Ma'am, you know, the countries and the global leaders are debating climate crisis, the climate change, setting climate goals. But as those debates are on the ground, your study has found how farmers are dying helpless with no voice, no one ready to hear them. Tell us the correlation that you drew between the rising temperatures and farmer suicides. What are the startling findings?
See, Rohit, the drought is not a new phenomenon in India. Drought has been happening. The problem right now is because of the climate change, the intensity of these droughts, the area under coverage, and also the frequency of drought is increasing. So, you know, there is a very credible research which shows that India's drought-prone area, the areas which are affected by drought, it has increased by almost 60% since 1997. And similarly, the frequency of these droughts have increased. Almost 2/3 of India is affected by some form of drought, and around 1/3 of India has been affected by at least 4 droughts in the last 1 decade. So you can see, like earlier, the drought used to occur, and even though it used to create perils for the farmers, it was still manageable for them. So if they had one drought, they could recover from that, the losses that they made from that drought. But right now, what's happening is they're hardly able to recover from one drought and they're hit by another, then by another, and then by another. So what does it create? They typically take loan for buying inputs, fertilizers, seeds, and other inputs to crop their land. And then when there is a crop loss because of the rainfall variation, then that creates their debt crisis. Now they can still recover from one debt crisis, but if they are being posed by one after another, then it becomes really difficult for them. And this situation is much worse for the small and marginal farmers because they don't have any savings. There are larger farmers who still have savings who are able to tide over that crisis. But what about smaller farmers? They are not able to tide over it. So, there have been a lot of research in the past which says the socioeconomic reason is the one which is behind it. But what we have tried to prove is through our analysis is how the years in which there has been a rainfall deficit, that has contributed to an increase in the suicide, and that correlation is very startling. There were 5 states which had the highest number of farmer suicides, and in those states, you can clearly see that there's a very high correlation between the years when there was a deficit in rain and in the same years, you can see an increase in the farmer suicide. So very clearly, there is a link between them.
Yes.
And yeah.
Ma'am, I want to understand from you, because you have quoted these statistics and the picture is rather grim, are the governments, both at the center and the states, which are most impacted and which are witnessing the most number of suicides, are they doing enough to mitigate this crisis?
Yeah, see, in India, we have one of the world's largest social protection program. It's Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. Now, this program guarantees 100 days of assured wage. It's a rights-based wage employment program. Nowhere in the world we have such a huge scale of program. But despite that, does it really provide that social safety net to these farmers when they are hit by a crisis? Now, in our previous research, we found that if MGNREGS is really there, then when farmers, they are hit by a crisis like this, ideally a program like MGNREGS should be able to provide them that fallback livelihood. So, okay, the crops are destroyed. Now they have a fallback where they can claim, they can go and they can gain some employment so that they can continue surviving. At least they can feed their families. And even again in our research, it was very clear that places where farmers got that access to job employment, the suicides got reduced. So very clearly, if farmers have that safety net, they are covered. But the problem is the implementation of this program is not uniform. It is rights-based. It is legally the right of any rural household to demand wage employment under this program. But is it always provided? There are operational issues. There are leakages in the program. And therefore, you have to understand that, there is a correlation very strong. And if this program is better implemented, obviously the farmer suicides would go down. But I would also say that this is not the only solution here. So, within this MGNR, I'll just make one point here. Within MGNREGS, I would say it's quite revolutionary program. Even globally, people cite this program because under normal circumstances, this program guarantees 100 days of employment. But when a drought of a severe category is announced, then farmer or households are guaranteed additional 50 days of employment. But that 50 days comes only if a drought of a severe category is declared by the government. But the problem is, in 2016, Indian Manual for Drought Management got changed, which meant that, earlier even moderate drought could get households could get access to that additional 50 days. Now only severe category can get. Again, in India, there's no drought early warning system. So the droughts get declared almost 3 to 4 months after the drought has actually happened. And the process for drought declaration has been made so difficult that in many cases, the drought even does not get reported. So these droughts almost act like a slow poison for the farmers. Like, what do? They have no social safety net. And as a result of that, they have to undertake distress migration, migration under distress, where they're almost in despair. So some farmers, they commit suicides or they are driven to suicidality. There are some who try to move under distress to make ends meet, to feed their families. And what happens is when they move in distress, there's another research which we did, where it was very clear that farmers, when these people move in distress, they are exposed to trafficking. And I can tell you more if you're interested, but it is sometimes it's a combination of a lot of these factors which push these farmers to suicide.
Yeah, ma'am, one final question to you. These are great solutions that you have elucidated. But I want to ask you about the climate solutions. You said 1/3 of India has suffered 4 droughts in the last 1 decade. Are these droughts here to stay, or can we do something to change our climate, to change this reality?
See, the reality is these droughts are going to increase only in frequency, not just in frequency, but also in intensity. And more areas might be impacted by it. Now, what we really need is to prepare for that crisis that we are all seeing. And MGNREGS program, again, is a great program of the government where we say it's not just provides employment, but it creates that rural infrastructure that can lead these community towards drought proofing, as you might say. And that drought proofing essentially would be, even if there is a low rainfall, there's a rainfall deficit, you have enough soil and moisture conservation to help them protect their crops to some extent. But beyond that, this is an issue of climate justice. These farmers in the rural areas, they did nothing to contribute to this climate crisis. Why should they be suffering this problem? And India has all right to demand for climate finance. And I think India has been raising this issue at global and international forums, where India, and especially these farmers, should be compensated for their losses through the international financing mechanism. Some of the solutions which have been proposed are insurance, that whenever a farmer suffers crop, they should be compensated for that. But that insurance should come from climate finance, should come from global funding.
All right, Ritu Bhardwaj, thanks very much for joining us with your perspective. As you put it so eloquently, these farmers did nothing to bring about this climate change, yet they are the ones who are suffering today. Thanks very much for joining us, ma'am.